Morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar entitled Have International Strategies Regarding Afghanistan Weakened or Strengthened the Taliban? As you all know, in 2021, Taliban took power in Afghanistan, and the international community responded in a variety of ways, certainly from the UN side and more specifically from the side of the West. There has been deliberate pressure put on the Taliban regime through sanctions, but also through incentives such as international aid with the aim of affecting change. The more specific goal of the pressure and the incentives was to evoke a more positive respect for human rights by the regime, and that would include respect for the rights of women and girls. So the question arises, looking back over the past couple of years, whether these strategies have been effective. Have they strengthened or have they weakened the Taliban? And we have a research report that we're going to receive a précis of and have a discussion around, prepared by Dr. Sibghatullah Ghaznawi, who has done this in partnership between the Kroc Institute and the Libertas Council. The Kroc Institute and Keough School at the University of Notre Dame have a program on Afghanistan. Its acronym is AFPAD, which stands for the Afghanistan Program for Peace and Development, that engages in facilitation of dialogue as well as research and research dissemination. We have a great lineup of speakers today, and we will eventually have time for audience comment and questions. I'm Laurie Nathan. I'm director of the Kroc Institute's Mediation program. I'm going to, when I'm done with the introductions, hand over to Arif Dostia, who is director of our Afghanistan program at the Kroc Institute and Keough School. And we'll move then to Dr. Ghaznawi, who's going to present the report that he was commissioned to do. He is Associate Research Scholar at the Arnold A. Salzman Institute of War and Peace Studies at Columbia University. We will then have a discussant, Mukadesa Yursi, who is Senior Advisor at Swiss Peace. We will have concluding remarks from our partner, Libertas Council, Chief of Staff, Emily Ann Mills. And as I said, we'll have some opportunity for audience questions that we'll address. So let me hand over to Arif, who will make some further framing remarks.
Thank you so much, Laurie. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, depending on your time zone. Thank you so much for joining today's conversation. I want to thank my colleagues in the panel, the Libertas Council, Emily, and Laurie, of course. This means a lot for this discussion that you're here because really we're going to look at how all of these global policies impact people's lives in the remotest places on Earth, and in this case, in remotest parts of Afghanistan. And in the past 4 years, particularly, as Laurie mentioned, we have been, I think the most immediate and the biggest question we have been dealing with is what to do with this group called the Taliban, who now rules and controls the geography of Afghanistan. And so what do we do? And we meaning the people of Afghanistan, but we also the region, the global community in relation to this group. What is the end goal? What has been achieved through these strategies? And what is really the way forward to make progress? So I really look forward to the discussion that Dr. Sabghat is going to have. I'm going to be a listener. I think that this is not going to be really a transfer of information from us to you, but I also want to encourage, as Laurie did, a discussion and exchange. So please feel free to engage, ask questions, comments through the means that Ari and Laurie mentioned. Yeah, thank you so much for being here. Back to you, Laurie.
Great, thank you, Arif. So we hand over now to the author of our report. Sibghatullah, we are looking forward to hearing how you went about doing your research and what your main findings were.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Arif. First of all, I must say my thanks and gratitude to Kroc Institute and colleagues at the Libertas Council for facilitating the process and assisting me through the process, data collection and all the facilitation that they provided. Thank you very much. As we all know that this topic of human rights for last 4 years in Afghanistan has been discussed and researched, and a good number of very good experts spent their time and came up with reports and different methodologies of assessing this and looking into this. In this bigger picture, I also looked into this issue of human rights, specifically women and girls in Afghanistan. And the question that exists, and everybody, every one of us is asking that question, that what is happening? Why is nothing working to improve situation of the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan and generally human rights situation over the past 4 years, despite the fact that all the available pressure tools that international community has at its disposal are applied. So what I did is I looked into this question from the perspective of the theory of linkages and leverages put forward probably 2 decades ago by Levitsky and Lokan. The theory that what linkages and what level of linkages might work over a regime or a government or a political group in international relations, and what leverages are there and how those leverages could be used. So looking into that perspective, what I did, I went to the review of the documents that United Nations being the lead agency steering the agenda of human rights in Afghanistan. So first I looked into their documents, about the meetings and all the efforts that United Nations has put together in last 4 years. And I think all the resources that are available to the UN agencies, they have put it forward to the service of the human rights. But the desired outcome or required outcome that were stated in official statements of the United Nations, they were not achieved. If we talk about the first Doha meeting, then the second Doha meeting, then the third Doha meeting, then the roadmap put forward in the Afghanistan mosaic, the United Nations assistance missions plan. So that is on one hand. On the other hand, international community from the document seems to be also looking towards United States as a leading country in this, in relationship with human rights and the current authorities in Afghanistan. So that was the second group of documents that I looked into, and then all other available reports published in last few years by scholars, by international agencies, in journalistic reports, and what was available online from official documents from inside Afghanistan. So how to understand that what opinion leaders and experts, specifically Afghan experts, also think about this and how they analyze the whole situation. So that was another part of the data and information that effort was made to bring it to this report. So that was just a brief about the methodology. It is not a first-hand data from the field, as I'm not there in the field. So what I would do next is, in this discussion, I would go briefly into what United Nations and the international community assumed, and what was the outcome, and what the neighboring countries of Afghanistan, being part of the United Nations and having supported the stand of United Nations in how then they reacted to the situation in Afghanistan as individual national entities out of the United Nations. So that is second part. And also third part is that how did it impact this two sets of interactions, one under the leadership of the United Nations and another that individual countries interacted with the authorities in Afghanistan, and how did that impact the authorities and what is coming out of it. So we try to look into that from the perspective of the consolidation, legitimacy, and success of the Taliban to keep together and maintain their control in Afghanistan. And second one is how they manage the trade in the region, as because of the international sanctions, they are not doing trade and financial and economic activities outside the region. And third one is would be concluding that what am I concluding from the whole discussion? So first, I will come back to the theory of, or the assumption that I came across from the review of these documents, that how did international community and United Nations leading the international community assumed that how to go forward. So the assumption from the document seems that there was this assumption that the new government after the August 2021, the new authorities in Afghanistan facing economic challenges, financial and humanitarian crisis taking shape. In such a situation, it will be difficult for them to resist to the pressure of not having an international recognition in conditionality of aid and complete stop over the development funding going to Afghanistan. So this was one of the pressure assumption in the international community. And then when we look to the meetings in Doha, the first meeting prioritizes the four areas: the counterterrorism, counter-narcotics, and then the broad-based governance and human rights. So this is the assumption or the strategy that was thought to work. Now, how did the individual countries in this bigger pressure environment that United Nations wanted to create? And at the beginning, it seemed that a consensus does exist. In the second step, when we look to the how did United States government worked in this environment, we come across the first document, the official document, that is the three-page summary, or maybe that is the whole document of the Doha Agreement from 2020 between the Taliban and the government of the US. In that document, we see that every emphasis is only on two things: not making Afghanistan, not making terrorists be able to use Afghanistan as a place from where they can stage attacks against United States or its allies. And second emphasis is repeatedly in the document that whenever the name of Islamic Emirate comes, it is mentioned that United States doesn't recognize it as an emirate or government. So these are repeated in the document. In the document, you don't see much mention of the human rights, women and girls' rights, or broad-based governance. When it comes to the official steps that were taken in the previous administration of the US, a special envoy for girls and women's rights was appointed, and a special envoy for relationship with the Taliban. Now, again, those two initiatives in their official meetings, when looking through the documents, their emphasis was more on understanding the environment for terrorist groups in Afghanistan and stopping that in counter narcotics. And less emphasis is seen, however, the efforts of the Special Envoy for Girls and Women Rights was there in its place, but the efforts of the Office of the Thomas West seem to be more focused on the counterterrorism and counter narcotics. Apart from the United States and UN, when we look to China, Russia, Pakistan, Iran, and the Central Asian countries, and then India, amongst those countries, we see that in the United Nations platform, they agree with the leadership of the United Nations. But when it comes to their individual national interests, you see an environment of competition. The dates of their meetings, the dates of their outreach to the existing government in Afghanistan, the negotiation in the public documents, press releases, you see that they are in a way competing for getting more understanding from inside Afghanistan and are reaching into new agreements with the government in Afghanistan. Now, China and Russia, they seem to be taking lead in last 4 years and going from saying no to relationship and then step by step improving relationship. China accepting a formal ambassador from Afghanistan under the current authorities, and Russia providing formal recognition. Then India going to high-level agreements and over the paving way for improvement of relationships. And obviously, Iran and Pakistan, they're doing business, and their business is trade mostly. When we look to the graph of the trade, it has been increasing year by year, and in 2025, the volume of trade was highest in last 4 years between Afghanistan and Iran, Afghanistan and Pakistan. What was its impact inside Afghanistan? What was the impact of this whole picture on the way the government in Kabul and also the leadership of this government in Kandahar? What did they achieve from this? In this, I have not discussed it in the paper, but we have a good amount of literature from the early years of 2021 and 22 and 23 that a lot of analysts were expecting that there are cleavages in different groups of the Taliban, and they will not be able to keep the consolidated political group to lead the government. But these 4 years indicate that actually what has been going on, the regime has consolidated. They have introduced new mechanisms of power maintenance and power consolidation. Again, I have not gone into details in the paper. Just one example is the councils of ulama in each province. They have established councils of ulama in each province. Actually, these councils did exist in the past, but what happened under this regime, those councils have become more stronger and more integrated into community, and they're bringing actually community grievances to the government. So that's a mechanism of outreach to the public, and I believe it has played a role beside the fragmented international approach to the consolidation of power in Afghanistan. Second thing this fragmented approach has done is that Taliban has dealt this, what they have used it as a tool of propagating their legitimacy inside Afghanistan to the public. They have portrayed an image of gaining legitimacy with time, and it seems from the official documents that they are trying also to convince their lower ranks that the international resistance over different issues will go away, and they will gain more international recognition over time. On the other hand, the local trade and business has also provided opportunities of revenues to the government, and that has helped in sustaining the revenues to the regime. There is also another finding that over these past 4 years, private sector has played a role in providing now, private sector not being able to do business outside Afghanistan, not being able to attract private and international investment, they have relied more and more on government funding and government projects inside Afghanistan. If we look into the profile of construction companies, they have relied on the National Agency of Development, the national company that was established under President Ashraf Ghani, and continue to function under the current regime. They have remained a large source of contracts to the private companies and source of employment creation. Second source is the mining industry. Now in the mining industry, again, there is a very interesting finding that over the last 4 years, the government in Kabul and Kandahar has provided tax rebates to their members through letters issued to them that if they partner with certain industry, certain mining industries, up to certain tons of that export or that extraction would be exempt from tax if there is one of the members of the group partnering and having that letter. So that has worked in 2 ways. One, to attract more and more private sector to be in support of the regime, and also to work in Afghanistan, keep their assets and resources in Afghanistan. Second, it has provided a platform of integration between private businesses and lower ranks of the movement. And I believe that it has also played a role in gaining more and more support for the government inside Afghanistan. So in this picture, that international approach is fragmented under the UN leadership. It looks to be a consensus, looks to be existing, but when it comes to the ground realities, it seems that they're fragmented, and actually they are fragmented. And when it comes to the role of the private sector in private businesses, the environment is set by the current use of pressure and linkages and leverages tool, that the private sector is pushed to coordinate more and more with the authorities and provide more opportunities to the members of the ruling group. So looking into this picture, I would come to the recommendation part, that what do I recommend? So first recommendation would be that the theory that has been used in past 4 years, that how the pressure and all the lack of recognition, assets, frozen assets, and stopping the international development in foreign investment in Afghanistan. A review of this whole theory should be done, that whether it is working in this direction, is there any other opportunities, other logical frameworks that we can employ, and then make a better use of it to change behavior over the human rights, specifically women and girls' rights. Secondly, I recommend that opportunities that could be achieved through partnering with private sector, that should be elaborated. And again, the approach to private sector should be a coherent and coordinated approach. Right now, it seems that, again, to private sector, the fragmentation exists. This year, World Bank decided to open its office in Afghanistan. And it seems that the small-scale development and microfinance projects would be resumed. Now, how can other countries, regional powers, and United Nations and United States contribute to the effort? How can a coordination take place that this initiative is again not used as an opportunity for suppression of human rights and making more opportunities for members of the regime? So this is another that private sector should be explored with more strong coherence and coordination over the idea of private sector engagement. So also the international coordination, I think that's one of the recommendation. New mechanisms, how to improve it, how to make the regional countries more responsibly acting in their interactions with the ruling authority in Afghanistan. And then in the economic programming, we see engagement of the private sector in the UNAMA's plan. We see it in the third Doha meeting of the UN. We see it in the efforts of the regional countries. As of this week, an agreement for exploration of oil was signed between an Uzbek and Afghan company joint venture. And then this Afghan company is also owner of the famous Afghan airline, Khmer. So how can we bring private entities to the table and in coordination over the human rights issues? And how can their presence be used to engage economic activities for human rights protection and safeguarding? This is another suggestion. And then mechanisms of reporting and monitoring from inside Afghanistan. I believe that international community, beside all the other efforts it's doing, from this day onward, an effort should be put forward with the authorities in Kabul that they should allow more monitoring and reporting from inside Afghanistan of the economic activities. I believe less attention should be paid to what has been done in past few years. I think this time more pressure should be put forward to allow direct monitoring, direct what I would say auditing of the financial and economic activities that are taking place from outside, whether it be from the regional countries like Chinese companies or Uzbek companies, or the Pakistani and Iranian companies who do a lot of trade. For example, the trade volume the export volume from Pakistan to Afghanistan was more than $1 billion in the first 6 months of 2025. Now, Pakistan, on one hand, is facing the challenge of the insurgency in the neighboring areas with Afghanistan. On the other hand, their trade with Afghanistan is flourishing and getting benefit from that. So there should be a direct monitoring in how is that activity not aiding suppression of the human rights in Afghanistan. So with this recommendation, I will stop here and look forward to your comments. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for those remarks. We look forward to getting into the heart of the debate. Before we get there, Mukadesa, you have the opportunity as our discussant from Swiss Peace to do an initial response. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Let me start by thanking the Kroc Institute and the Libertas Council for convening this very important conversation. And Dr. Sibghat, it's an honor to have this opportunity to reflect on this very thoughtful paper. You're certainly the paper is certainly taking on a pressing question of what has been the impact of international engagement with the Taliban since 2021. And I believe that you have convincingly shown that sanctions, asset freezes, and conditional development aid have not produced the expected improvements in governance or human rights, particularly for women and girls. Instead, the Taliban have entrenched their rule, consolidated internal power, and adopted governance through regional partnership and informal economic channels. I think what I really liked about the paper is that it is policy relevant, it's timely, but that it also draws on a wide range of sources. And I think with the lack of credible data and the limitations in accessing such data, I think your ability to draw on a wide range of sources and give us a comprehensive picture of both global and regional strategies is, I think, commendable. Also, what I really liked is that you don't only the paper doesn't just describe what has failed, but it also explains that why these strategies have fallen short. So building on this incredible insight, I would like to offer three reflections from my own perspectives, both as a former policymaker and as someone who have observed these dynamics closely. First, I have watched Afghanistan's neighbor, and many of their examples were brought up and discussed in detail by Dr. Sibghat. I have watched these neighbors engage with the Taliban in ways that stand in sharp contrast to the principles that once guided our diplomacy as policymakers in the former Afghan government. When I served as Deputy Minister of Trade, many of these same regional counterparts spoke of partnership with the former government back then in terms of values and reciprocal commitments. But today that language has largely vanished. Instead, most neighbors practice what you also called practical diplomacy, pursuing border stability, trade, water agreements, while basically avoiding any linkage to human rights or inclusive governance. And what has been striking to me is how seamlessly conversations shifted after the fall of the former government. Conversations shifted from the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan to the Taliban regime with little pause to demand any change in behavior. So I think this pragmatism has granted the Taliban a measure of legitimacy without really requiring them to give anything back. I think it's also worth remembering that we have to look at this practical diplomacy within the context of not only regional, but I think also what's happening globally in terms of how the conversation around geopolitics of all of us basically moving away from a multipolar world. So I think it's worth putting it in that context, but still I think I have, as a former policymaker, I have been pretty stunned by the sharp contrast and engagement, but also the smooth transition. Second, I want to quickly address the economic picture, which is often a little misinterpreted. The World Bank's 2024 report reports that Afghanistan has experienced an average of 2.3% growth after a deep contraction of 2021. But it's important to remember that this growth is not a sign of recovery. It is largely consumption-driven and mainly supported by remittances and humanitarian aid, rather than real economic activity. So in other words, Afghanistan's economy is surviving but not thriving. It is still aid-dependent, fragile, and without the kind of investment or dynamism that could generate genuine resilience. Throughout the social media, we obviously see a lot of within the context of practical diplomacy, many exchanges, whether it's just a photo op or it leads to an agreement that gets signed between the two parties. But I think what's really also important is to be mindful of what type of an economic activity has been generated from those practical diplomacy. Third, and perhaps most importantly, I think ideology, as discussed by Dr. Sibghat, remains a central barrier to inclusive development. For example, the Taliban's religious stance on financial instruments such as microfinance has restricted access to credit, and from what I understand from my conversations with former or active World Bank colleagues, that it has severely, obviously, constrained entrepreneurship and the private sector's economic activity. And I think this also has direct consequences for all entrepreneurs, particularly for Afghan women, whose businesses are overwhelmingly small, home-based, and heavily reliant on microfinance loans. So by shutting down or discouraging such mechanisms, the Taliban's not only limit women's economic agency, but also, I believe, are dismantling one of the few lifelines available to families struggling to survive. So basically, the result is an economic environment that is not only stagnant, but also actively exclusionary. So taken together, all of this, I believe, reinforces Dr. Sibghat's conclusion on the fact that international strategies have too often been fragmented, reactive, and disconnected from a broader theory of change. But it also highlights a deeper risk that when the global community prioritizes pragmatism over principle, that when we accept transactional diplomacy or shallow economic stabilization as good enough, it is basically the ordinary Afghans who end up paying the price. And I'd like to conclude this with a question for all of us here is that, will the international or the global community settle for pragmatism that sustains the Taliban, or really try to bring in or fight for principles that help sustain the Afghan people? I will leave it there. And thank you so much once again, Dr. Sibghat, for this remarkable paper and for giving me the opportunity to share. And I look forward to discussing further.
Great, thank you for that. So let me pose a question to both of our panelists in the light of the last remarks now. Are we not being a little too naive or romantic if we imagine that the international community acts on principle? I mean, it doesn't, for the most part. It does business according to the logic of realpolitik. The member states are not unconcerned with principles and norms, but they're always motivated by interests primarily. And so their interests don't lie, as they see it, in putting sustained, severe, concerted, unified pressure on the Taliban. That's not to say they don't care about the situation in Afghanistan, but it's to say they don't care enough in relation to their own interests. Would that not change only if they were under pressure? In other words, if the critical international actors here were under severe pressure themselves to take a tougher line on human rights and rights of women and girls. And that's also to pose the question, who would put pressure on the critical international actors And if it's not Afghans themselves that are putting pressure, when's the pressure? So these are tough strategic questions. I'm not suggesting there are easy, obvious answers, but I put that to both the panelists for your response, for your consideration.
Mukaddasa, do you want to go first, please?
No, I think I would give this one to you and then I'll follow.
Thank you. I think this is very important that with the international community and the critical actors in the international community, where the pressure must come from. I would have two suggestions, one for the Afghan diaspora and Afghan experts, and another one for the human rights groups in people who are interested in the human rights issues and governance issues in Afghanistan, but not interested enough to overcome the pressure of the real politic of the international diplomacy and all that. To the Afghan, one argument that, or one suggestion that I would prefer to share is that we should rely in our arguments on our history to remind the international community about our history, that how a consolidated central government in Afghanistan with strong local suppressive power did not end up in a stable Afghanistan in the long run, and Afghanistan became again and again a place where the citizens were not protected and where even people who were in the authority were not protected anymore. I would refer to the very recent history of the early 80s, how suppression didn't work for the regime of the leftist party, and how then Afghans became to be forced to go out of Afghanistan. Even if we go a few decades ago to probably early 20th century, how the suppressive government of Abdurrahman Khan cannot yield in a stable and united Afghanistan, and how it fragmented in just a few months and became a big challenge for the neighboring powers of that time. So we have that history. And the second part of this suggestion would be that in the Afghan society, the way the governance is going on, that we have a strong central authority with no voices for people who disagree with the authority, no voices for women and girls, no voices for minorities. That has also not worked for Afghanistan. And we have probably hundreds of examples from outside Afghanistan that in a multi-ethnic, multilingual society like Afghanistan, this does not work. It might work in the first political generation of the ruling group, but as soon as it comes to the second generation, which is normally taking place in 10, 15 years, then they start fighting and quarreling amongst themselves over power and make the country unstable, and also the trickle effect goes to the region. So that, I think, should be added to the human rights argument of the Afghan diaspora. We should tell our international friends that, look, this stability of 4 years is not reflective a longer stability. This cannot be foundation for a society that can thrive for next 50 years or 100 years. Over 10 or 15 years, a bigger challenge inside Afghanistan, because population is growing. As Mukaddasa rightly pointed, the economy is surviving, not growing. It is just a subsistence purchasing power of the people, not a big investment taking place. Then keeping women out of the economy, that will not yield in an economy that can sustain a population which is soon going to become 50 million or 60 million over 10, 15 years. So that is one part of for the international community. Again, my recommendation would be that all these countries in the region and also internationally need to look into their own systems, how it works. and where their stability comes from. Is it just from having one political authoritarian group? Even if we look into China, their political party is very representative at village and district and county level. They have all these local election system that they bring people to the party. Not ideal, but much different from what we have right now in Afghanistan. I think that's my suggestion. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Mukadesa?
Thank you, Dr. Nathan. I think that's a very important and, as you rightly say, tough question. But I would like to push slightly on what you mentioned about not seeing pressure from inside Afghanistan. I think it's really important to put that in the context. I think the Afghan people, and especially women, are operating under one of the most repressive environments in the world, where protests have been criminalized, dissent is punished, and freedom of expression is basically shut down. So, but despite even under these conditions, I believe that Afghans have spoken out. We have seen women marching in Kabul streets despite the beatings and arrests. We have seen teachers running underground schools. We have seen small businesses still trying to sustain themselves against all of these restrictions. So I think the absence of large scale visible pressure in the way we want to see it, I think it's not a sign of acceptance of what's going on. I think it's more of a reflection of the cost of resistance. And I think that is precisely where the role of outsiders, the global community, becomes important in order to maintain human rights as a central condition of engagement. I think that is certainly something important to keep in mind. And then also on question of, I believe, diplomacy. I think this practical engagement, it doesn't only it's not only transactional and risks legitimizing repression, but I think it also normalizes a form of governance that I believe is risky, not only for Afghanistan, but I think something that, if normalized, is, I think, risky for governments across the world, or for people across the world. So I think stripping away principles completely from diplomacy, I believe, is something that shouldn't be normalized, and I feel like it's on all of us, including public intellectuals, scholars, everyone's responsibility to engage on this from their angle of work or scholarly debate. Yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Okay, thank you. We've been talking about the one half of the equation with respect to leverage on a repressive and authoritarian regime. The one half of the equation we're looking at is the pressure. The other half of the equation is the target, the regime. Now, whether the pressure succeeds or not depends on both factors. And one can say there's a third factor, which is time. So in the passing of time, does the pressure from the external get stronger or weaker? And we're hearing that it's being diluted and it's becoming increasingly fragmented. On the other side of the equation, the question is, is the target regime resilient? Is it able to hold its position and cohesion, notwithstanding the pressure? And that's partly to do with its own ideology. It's partly to do with how much pain it's willing to bear, and that's linked to ideology. And it has to do with the target regime's vulnerability. because the more vulnerable the regime, economically, politically, from a security point of view, the more likely it is to succumb to pressure. So we've looked at the first half of the equation, which is the external pressure. The other half of the equation is Taliban regime. And it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on how they've been able to consolidate to the extent that they have. To what extent do there appear to be fissures and divisions within Taliban? And related to that, are there points of vulnerability as far as the Taliban regime is concerned? So we switch our focus from the external to the target of pressure. Should we do that in the reverse order, the responses? Mukadesa, do you want to kick us off? And then we'll hand over to Dr. Sibghatullah.
Thank you, Dr. Nathan, for these very thoughtful and engaging questions. Certainly, I believe that for a group like the Taliban to go from being actively in a war to taking the important responsibility of governance, I believe is for any type of, armed actors, I would say non-state armed actors, I don't see that to be an easy transition. So for the Taliban also, I don't think that it has been a smooth path. What has obviously made it easier for them is not only just their ideological rigidity, which basically has for a large part contributed to making them less vulnerable, but I think it's also, what we exactly have been discussing on this conversation is the lack of external pressure and also their ability to hold the regime under repressive conditions. So I believe that the repression of people's voices, the lack of a global community with a single strategy on how to deal with them, or if not necessarily a single strategy, but a clear line of how to engage with a group like the Taliban, I think has certainly contributed in both strengthening their governance, but also I think in giving them the space that they needed to transition from armed actor to taking the realm of responsibility. That doesn't mean that it has been easy, that there are no fraction or divisions among them. I think the one really clear division that everybody is pretty much aware of, and to the extent that I am aware that I believe even under the umbrella of the practical diplomacy, it's been recognized by everybody who engages and goes to Afghanistan to meet the Taliban, is that they make sure that they meet head of these, both groups that are currently the Haqqanis and also the Kandahari Taliban, who are currently basically the two main leading actors that signatories from foreign countries, when they visit Afghanistan, they apparently make it a point to make sure that they meet these two leaderships separately, signaling that they basically acknowledge the division of power that exists. So I believe that transitioning has not certainly been easy, but I think the lack of everything that we talked about has certainly made it easier for them to run their version of governance.
Good, thank you. I like that last phrase, their version of governance, captures it delicately. Sibka, so in your hands, and then I'm going to invite Arif to come in and comment on any of this as he likes.
Thank you. Yes, that is important question, that how a government or a governing group from inside, how much resilient that group is to all these pressures. That plays a very important role. And again, looking into it under the theory of linkages and leverages, we need to analyze the tools that could be useful in linkages, economic and financial, cultural, communication, civil society to civil society engagements, political groups to political groups, ideological and non-ideological groups. We can look to all those factors, that how much strongly a country is linked to the international community, and then how can those linkages work in raising demand from inside a country for policy change. Second one is the leverages. Again, it depends that how much that country has systems of bypassing leverages or keeping voices down. For example, if military power of a group is immense, like we see in Burma or in some cases in Pakistan, that military is strong and well coordinated, well trained, and they can maneuver their way out of any internal political storm, and then succeed as victors. So in that case, I think in Afghanistan, one comparative case could be, not exactly a good comparative case would be Turkey, where military became weaker against political parties over years, and then their coup failed in 2014-15. So we also need to look to the military power of the Taliban, and how is it playing a role in keeping voices suppressed and the regime consolidated. One area that you raised in your question is the ideological basis and ground of the group cohesion of the Taliban. That is a very understudied area. I tried to search, find good sources. I found actually only one or two authors who have indicated in some chapters of their book, very lightly touched upon that section, that how is ideology playing a role in keeping the group cohesive. Personally, I believe, from my experiences in post-conflict and post-war countries, ideology becomes the main source of cohesion for any group. If we look to Vietnam, right after the US withdrawal, they faced a lot of financial, economic challenges. And if we look to the Ho Chi Minh movement before the war, before winning the war, they were not that socialist. They became socialists out of necessity. That's what I believe, to keep the group coherent, and also to find a black knight from outside. That is the term Levitsky has used in his book, that those regimes that have a black knight that come for their to save them in critical moments of their survival, that also plays a very critical role in a regime to stay consolidated and cohesive. So now if we look to the case of the Taliban in Afghanistan, we see that China, Russia, and Pakistan all have played a role to be their knight saving them. Another one is the ideological institutions that gives perpetual thinking process, or stabilizes the thinking process around a religious or ideological issue. That is, again, an area that is understudied, specifically for Afghanistan, that needs study. A third one is the recent history. When you look to the Western lens of examining Afghan's history, is based mostly on post-colonial way of thinking about Afghanistan. Even today, when people explain Afghanistan or discuss Afghanistan, researchers from the West, they fall into the pitfall of considering it as a tribalistic society, as a society divided along tribal ethnic lines do exist, But again, they go deeper into tribal lines. They go to Paktia Kandahar issue. They go to Ghelja Durrani issue. But the reality is that the last 3-4 decades of war in Afghanistan, the Soviet occupation, and then the NATO and American intervention in Afghanistan, that has created another thinking beneath the surface that we do not have much writing about, but the thinking exists, which is, I think it is more religious, but I believe more data is required to come in that area. But it is an area that we need to explore, that how has that enabled the current government to have more stronger support in the rural Afghanistan, if not in the urban Afghanistan. Thank you.
That is a great research question for your next report. Arif.
Thank you. I know I said I would not speak much, but let me make 3 really quick points in reaction to this great conversation. Number one, I think it's important that we simplify the conversation and untangle, because there's so much going on. So there's the question of what the people can do. And as I outlined in the very beginning, the region and the global community. And for the sake of this conversation, I think that the global community, really, like, in my opinion, when I look at it, I think of the United States, European countries, and some of the major international organizations like the UN and EU. And so these, they have had really a mixed strategy of all kinds of strategies, but they have not been really intentional. And the reason is that there is really not a long-term objective for Afghanistan. And this is something we continue to ask our international colleagues, is what do you want to achieve in Afghanistan? And I think that a lot of the major actors in Afghanistan also want to know that, because some of them say we do not want to swim upstream. And so that clarity is needed, especially because of the weak position that a lot of these actors are situated. So we do hear different types of objectives. For example, but it's not very clear. Does the international community, particularly the actors that I mentioned, do they want reform? Do they want moderation? Do they just want to contain the Taliban? Do they want to sustain, as Muqaddasa Yurish said, do they want to sustain the regime? Or what is it that they want to do? What I understand is that there is one goal, at least, which largely appears to be negative, and that is that the international community does not want the Taliban to collapse. That is my understanding. The goal is we don't want the Taliban to collapse. But what is it that we want? What is the end goal here? I think that that is not clear. And until we get to that clarity, then it would be very, very difficult to talk about strategies and the activities. And it would also, I think, be I don't know if that's fair also to expect a whole lot from the local population under certain circumstance, the current circumstance that they are in. I think that this is my last point, is that the UN's mosaic approach is probably closest to at least identifying some milestones, linking some of the strategies with some milestones, but I think that they also have not gotten there, and because of that, that approach has also received a lot of criticism in and of itself. I think that it's an important approach if it gets more clarity, if it just clarifies that longer term, bigger goal that could also rally all the different partners in the international community and Afghanistan around it.
Thank you, Arif. Picking up on your last point about the UN, one of the participants has, through the chat function, posed the question about whether the UN could play more of an effective role in coordinating, in harmonizing the international position, in overcoming the fragmentation. And that's a big challenge, of course, because the UN is not separate from its member states. It is a forum, above all, in its essence. It is a collection of member states. And of course, the Secretariat has some relative autonomy, but ultimately it's an organization of member states. So it reflects the state of international thinking. Do the panelists think that the UN could be doing more or doing things differently with respect to Afghanistan? Is this in fact still high on the UN agenda? And alternatively, is it kind of falling off the UN agenda? So I invite your responses on thinking about how the UN is doing, could be doing. Sibka, you can kick us off on this.
Thank you. I think there was a good place for, I wish this question was raised and asked in 2021, that how UN should proceed and what are the major risk areas. Back then, I believe that UN also was influenced by the concerns of bigger powers like United States, the counterterrorism and counter-narcotics concern, and those two became as the first milestones of achievement for the new regime in Kabul. And it indicates that they performed well on that one. At least I was reading some reports of BBC in which they have put some graphs together, and another research institute from Europe in which they show the narcotics graph going very steeply down, and then the terrorism graph. So having two big successes in showcasing it to the international community actually dampened the other demands. That's what I think. So if the United Nations had independently acted as the guarding agency or the protecting agency only for the human rights, and had let other issues for the rest of the bigger powers to pursue it independently of the UN platform, that would have been a better strategy. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Mukadesa?
Certainly, I think I agree with Dr. Sabghat that UN can and should do much better than what it's currently doing. I think there is also, given the UNAMA's strong presence in Afghanistan, I think it's also a bit of a double-edged sword, because I always wonder to what extent, I really like, Nathan, your point about the UN being the member states, but also when UN has an office, a presence under the office of UNAMA in Afghanistan, I don't know to what degree does it actually limits their constructive engagement, because they have to constantly balance the risks of alienating Taliban to the extent that the UNAMA office will get shut down, or that, constantly providing concession in order to be able to maintain their physical presence in Afghanistan. So I think for me, that clearly has always been a question, that to what extent that physical presence and that the office's activities on the ground actually is happening in a completely different silo than what the member states would generally engage on Afghanistan. That's one thing. And then the second thing is that from my own experiences of engagement with the current and former UN officials who work on Afghanistan, unfortunately, I think their understanding of intersectionality in Afghanistan is pretty narrow, and to a larger extent, I think even outdated. In basically looking at the issue of Afghanistan just from the angle of the ethnicity, or thinking of inclusive governance as those tick boxing exercise of making sure that ethnic balance is maintained just by the sake of it. I think that really undermines this growing and complex notion of intersectional identities in Afghanistan. I believe even notions when it comes to, if I can give specific examples, I think in case of Afghan women, basically putting them in boxes of who is an insider, who is an outsider. How do you really define an outsider? How does UN want to engage with Afghan civil society on issues of women? When it's limiting itself by boxing Afghan women or Afghan civil society into these categories of like who is an insider, who is an outsider. While I think the identities, the real identities of Afghans like myself, Dr. Sabghat, Arif, is really complex and I think sectional. So I do believe that view is also to a big extent lost on the UN, and it always makes me wonder to what extent that basically impacts their ability to engage in Afghanistan constructively.
So I think there's an interesting question about UNAMA, which is, you're raising an important point about UNAMA, which is that in a way it's compromised by virtue of being in country. It's compromised in the sense that it can't speak out as loudly and clearly as it may want to. I stressed earlier that the UN is a forum of member states, a collection of member states, and realpolitik is often the dominant form of international politics. At the same time, the United Nations is the custodian of norms, and it's set up to promote through Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. The UN exists for many reasons, one of which is to promote these norms that member states have formally said that they subscribe to. So you would expect that of UNAMA. But UNAMA is constrained by virtue of being in country, and it needs cooperation of the Taliban in order to remain in country and fulfill other functions. One of its functions in UN Security Council resolutions is to facilitate dialogue amongst Afghans. And I speak from a position of ignorance, but it's not clear to me from a distance that UNAMA is in fact playing that role, that it is in fact facilitating dialogue. So I throw that out as a question we may want to look at briefly, but also to flag a question that's come through the chat. I think that Mukadesa picks up on something that you raised about women who are running home-based businesses. And there's a question through the chat function, how effective is that? How productive is that? Is this working? Any reflections that you have on that issue would be interesting.
Sure. I think, given the current context, I believe the question of this was a question that actually came up quite often during the time that I was working at the Ministry of Commerce, was, to what extent we needed to empower Afghan women entrepreneurs towards more sustainable forms of business, to moving away from small businesses to medium-sized enterprises. I think this question has always been there in relation to any country with a similar economic outlook like that of Afghanistan. But I think what makes it really challenging in the current context of Afghanistan is and perhaps makes these small businesses, regarding of how small it is, still a viable option to continue to support, is that basically the current repressive environment does not allow for any of these businesses to exist anymore. Regardless of the size of whether it's a small business or it's a larger business, and especially when it comes to women entrepreneurs. So I think with the lack of, a complete exclusion, with the lack of that form of a support for the private sector, particularly women, and also with the formal pursuit of exclusionary policies that currently the Taliban is following, especially in relation to women, I believe, that it is probably vital more than ever to support these businesses, because some of these households, have these women entrepreneurs as their only breadwinner. They don't have a male to go out there and be the breadwinner for the family. So for these women, to sustain these businesses regardless of their size, and to be able to run them, I think, from their home is extremely crucial. But I think certainly, I think it brings us to that bigger question that we have been discussing here, is like, the question in 2021 was moving from small business to a medium-sized business. But I think it's unfortunate that today we are talking about, that with all these exclusionary policies, what the Taliban have also done is, in some ways, they have brought the benchmark very low to a place where we are having this conversation, and this unfortunate conversation of, forget about moving to medium-sized enterprises. If the woman can sustain what they have, let's continue that. And I think that's pretty grave, and something for all of us to really scratch our heads around, on where are the benchmarks currently set.
Okay, we're drawing to a close. I want to invite any of the panelists, if they wish, to make closing remarks. And Arif, you're welcome too, of course. And then I'll hand over to Emily. Is there something you want to say to Afghans in the diaspora, for example, or in country? Are there messages that you want to use this opportunity to convey? So I'm putting you on the spot, and I know that's difficult, especially given the repressive conditions in the country. If you don't want to tackle that question directly, that's up to you, but I'll inviting you to make closing remarks before we end this meeting. Sibghat.
Thank you. I think it's also one of the, it is one of the recommendations of my paper, the engagement of private sector. And again, theoretical basis for this recommendation is that open and free societies do require a population that has certain level of economic independence and financial independence. In currently, a large number of Afghans dependent on international aid, dependent on very small street side businesses and vending shops. It becomes very difficult for them to have the financial and the material resources to come together and think about larger issues of human rights and national interest. So the effort of engaging private sector in a way that it can be conducive to better financial opportunities for general population and specifically for women-headed families, I think that should be brought to consideration by Afghan diaspora. And I think for this, a more open way of thinking would be required for the Afghan diaspora to think that in certain ways the question would be raised that how is it going to benefit the current authorities and how we can stop that. That's the second step. But the first step, I believe that a new conversation should come to the table to enable people inside Afghanistan to think beyond earning 1 or 2 times bread. Yes, I will stop there. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Muqaddasa, concluding closing remarks from your side.
Thank you, Dr. Nathan. I don't really, I think it's especially as a woman, I don't really see myself in a place to really provide any thoughts on what should be done and how things should move forward, especially when I think of my fellow Afghan women, who probably know it much better than me. They're already doing it. They're already exercising that inside the country, as difficult as it is, I think it's important for them to be able to count on us, as people with a grave understanding of what's going on inside Afghanistan, and also our ability to not be living under that repressive regime, to to continue to contribute in productive ways as we can, but also I would say, I always call this my stubborn hope for Afghanistan. I think despite all the challenges, I personally have this stubborn hope for Afghanistan that I think makes me not to give up on the country. And I think that would be something that I would, if possible, ask everyone to hold in relation to Afghanistan, as difficult as it might be to hold it.
Great, I appreciate that. The president of Notre Dame has made this issue his kind of main call in very difficult times of crisis, where we may not necessarily have grounds for optimism. We can nevertheless be hopeful, and we maintain hope in order to have dignity and confer dignity. So I like the idea of stubborn hope. Arif, any closing remarks from your side before I hand over to Emily?
Sure. I think these two messages are great, what Dr. Sabghat and Muqaddasa John said. We can end with those. And I'll just maybe say it in my own words is, number one, at a very strategic level, I think we do need to re-examine our assumptions. There are certain assumptions that we worked with over the past 4 years that I think we have learned are not going to be, have not proven true. For this will happen, so and so will do this. And that requires a new conversation, as Dr. Sabghat put it. The second is where we place our confidence is really, really important. And so in line with what Muqaddasa John said, I think the stubborn hope, I also refer that to it as evidence-based hope, and evidence is actually in the capability of our own people, what we have done. So the place of confidence has to come back to Afghanistan, to our people, rather than looking outside for answers or waiting for this country or that country or this organization or that organization to do something for us. We have to take leadership and we have to move forward. There is hope in that type of an action.
Thank you, Arif. I want to, before handing over to Emily, just reinforce that last point. As a South African, I was involved in South Africa's transition to democracy. And for the first 10 or 15 years after the birth of our new democracy, we were regarded as one of the most successful transitions in the world. And so we were asked constantly to share our thoughts and lessons and experiences with people from other crisis areas. And the main lesson was we did it for ourselves. You know the famous Frank Sinatra song, I did it my way. We really did benefit enormously from international solidarity. It was a critical element of the anti-apartheid struggle. But at the end of the day, we were self-reliant and we developed self-reliance. And our perspective was, as a people, as a liberation movement, as civil society, this is our struggle, this is our future, this is our destiny. And it's ultimately up to us. If not us, then no one. So that message to Afghans, especially in the diaspora, since there's less repression and more freedom, to be emboldened, to have the stubborn optimism and stubborn hope and pursue it assertively, I think is a good message on which to end. Emily, you have the final word.
Thank you, Dr. Nathan. Well, thank you to our wonderful friends and colleagues for their leadership and for this important conversation. I work with the Libertas Council, and it is a privilege for us to partner with Arif Dostiar, Dr. Sabad and the Notre Dame's Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies on this timely research project. And it was a privilege to listen in on this conversation and all of the additional questions it raised. With so many conflicts and challenges facing the world today, what is happening in the important country of Afghanistan can get overlooked. But with an estimated population of over 42 million people and a wide diaspora, the pursuit of human rights and a future for the wonderful people of Afghanistan is vitally important, which is why wise clarity is so important. Clarity about what has happened in the past, clarity about what is happening now, and clarity on how to move forward. And I'm so grateful for the leaders on this panel who are bringing these issues to our attention with such clarity today. The desire to clarify both the intended and unintended consequences of engagement with the Taliban is what is driving this research project to examine diplomatic engagement, economic sanctions, humanitarian aid, as well as limited military interventions. And Dr. Sabad's points outlining the initial interests of the international community, the existence of consensus, and then how changes in regional geopolitics and motivations of national interests have fragmented that consensus are all so insightful for understanding the very real impacts and challenges of engagement today. And then this research and Muqaddasa's insightful comments also provide further clarity on how engagement impacts the human rights situation in Afghanistan, where restrictions on women and civil liberties and political freedoms persist and remain deeply troubling and challenging, as well as limited. I'm so grateful for the leadership of all of those on this webinar who offer us a realistic understanding and concrete examples of how things are, a vision for a future stubborn hope, and a willingness to help us think strategically and with wise clarity on how to move forward. The research paper that served as the foundation for this conversation will become available in the coming months and will be sent in an email to everyone who registered for this webinar. So please keep an eye on your inboxes. We do hope that it serves as a useful tool in shaping practical action as we all agree that the future of Afghanistan and its people are of inherent value and importance. We're so grateful for everyone joining today and for the work that all of you in the audience are doing in building together towards this stubborn hope. Let's keep this conversation going. And so thank you all, and thank you, Dr. Nathan, for moderating. I'll turn it back to you.
There's nothing I want to add after that great closing. Thank you for your concluding remarks. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to Arif. Thank you to our support staff at the Kroc Institute for arranging this. And thank you to the participants. We look forward to the next event and we move forward with stubborn hope. Thank you all.